My name is Mike Donnelly. I'm the chair of the Georgia Partnership Board, and we're happy to be here. I'm really happy to be here with you for today's Critical Issues Forum. First of all, I want to give some thanks to AT&T for their continued support of all of our 2019 Critical Issues Forum. So let's hear it for AT&T. Also want to thank the Georgia Department of Education and the Georgia Professional Standards Commission for partnering with us on this important program. And now I'd love to call up Beverly Ferguson. She's the Senior Director of Community Affairs with Georgia Pacific, and she'll make some comments on behalf of Georgia Pacific. Beverly?
Thank you so much, and good morning. It is a pleasure to have you here in the Georgia Pacific Center. This morning, we have been a long-standing partner of the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, and of course, as a former educator, I love that excellence in the name of the organization because that is what we strive for. Here at Georgia Pacific, education has been one of our 4 pillars for decades. Georgia Partnership, Teach for Atlanta, Atlanta Public Schools, other districts, and also education across our entire footprint of over 200 manufacturing facilities. So we are a long-standing partner with the partnership and with other organizations in education. This is one of our sweet spots, and this is where we have chosen to invest Georgia Pacific dollars. Thank you so much again for being here on behalf of Christian Fisher, our president and CEO, the president of the Georgia Pacific Foundation, who is also my manager, Curly Dossman. Curly, can you stand? I can't do anything without him. And all of our manufacturing facilities across the country, our leadership team, thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Beverly. Well, very good. So today's meeting, today's topic, of course, is on building the teacher pipeline. And when you think about where we're going to spend our time today and the importance, you know, my mother is a teacher, retired teacher. My oldest sister is a retired teacher. So the importance of teachers is really near and dear to my heart. And I think we all know from spending time in education the impact that a great teacher can have, right? They can change the direction of lives. They can have, at minimum, a huge impact during that year, but on the upside, can literally change the direction of a student's life. And so today's topic and the time that we'll spend, I hope my mom did a pretty good job. She'd be proud of me today. And so today's topic, I think, is near and dear to all of our hearts, or we wouldn't be here. And it's also exciting because today this is the largest, we'll have the largest attendance ever at a Critical Issues Forum. And again, I think that speaks to the topic and the importance of addressing recruitment, retention, and to the extent that teachers are leaders as well. Again, today we have the highest registration of any previous Critical Issues Forum, and we know the teacher pipeline and the work that we can do to impact that positively pays off for, in fact, generations. And so to help us launch the program, of course, we want to have Steve Dollinger come up and provide the report from the Georgia Partnership. So, Steve.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's an exciting day. One of the most important variables that we know of and to help improve education is that teacher pipeline, and we're all over today. Let me walk you through our packets so you'll know exactly what is in there and why it's in there. Also, I'll give you a little bit other background information to kind of set the tone for our meeting. The first thing you'll see is the agenda. I'll come back to that in just a few minutes. Resource materials, Mike mentioned and thanked AT&T for sponsoring our forums. Again, I want to thank Beverly and Curly for letting us use this great facility. We have a lot of our forums here. But at the bottom, I want to draw your attention to where it says, save the date. Our next critical issue forum will be August 21st, and the current title, this could change a little bit, it's Leaders' Social-Emotional Skills, the missing link to optimizing culture and performance. As a teacher and a school leader, and now leading a nonprofit, we hear so often that it's important for the leader to build that culture so we can maximize performance. We know teaching is one of the key ingredients for student performance. Well, we're not just talking about schools. We're also talking about businesses. So in August, we're going to be talking about all kinds of leadership and what can a leader do to help his or her own social-emotional learning, and then what can that leader do to help his or her staff and team. In schools, of course, we're addressing that even with students, but in the corporate sector, businesses that get awarded the best place to work in Atlanta. How do they do that? What is the culture they're building? What's the social emotional culture that the leader is doing, and how is he or she doing that? So stay tuned for more information on that as we get closer to August 21st. Also in your packet is the bios, the beige papers for our speakers. You know our style is not to read long bios for people we introduce. I'll come back to this in just a few minutes as we bring up our keynote speaker, but you can read this in detail. The next page is some information. It's an infographic from the Professional Standards Commission. Very helpful information there that gives you some more background if you're into the research piece. That might be something that you want to read a little bit more thoroughly. You know that every year we publish the top 10 issues to watch. This is the 15th edition, 15 years that we've been putting this out. They're not all the issues in education, but they're 10 of the hot ones. And interestingly enough, one of the 10 this year is working with teachers. It's actually teaching, elevating the profession now. Talking about how do we elevate the profession of our teacher corps to not only recruit them, but retain them in the classroom. You may want to pick that up. There's some up at the table. There's a lot of resource materials there that if you didn't pick them up on the way in, you may want to get on the way out. And the top 10 is also on our website. Just to cast the big picture of the background of our work, we had a wonderful grant from the Guazetta Foundation, a 3-year study we conducted looking at what high-performing states and countries are doing with education policy. We've named that EdQuest Georgia, and we came up with these 7 buckets of areas that high-performing states and countries are using. I know we have many professors and deans and some leaders of school system HR departments. If you're really into the data and research, there's hundreds of pages of research behind this. You can do that to your heart's delight, but you can look at some of the pieces behind this and see what that tells you. You do have a piece in your packet that is one of the 7 buckets. It's about quality teaching. On the front side, it talks about elements of an effective system, but on the back, we distilled this down into a stoplight kind of format. So we worked with gubernatorial candidates, state superintendent candidates, and talked about education policy. If it's green, the policy's good to go. Leave it alone, don't mess it up. If it's yellow, perhaps it needs more funding or leverage more broadly across the state. If it's red, that's where we need to focus our ed policy in Georgia. That's where we're behind other high-performing states and countries. So you'll probably hear some of that today. If you'd like, you can go on our website. There is a one-pager that has a stoplight for all 7 of these buckets. Then there is a separate one-page for each of the 7 buckets. And again, some of that material is at the table up front as you come in. The next piece in your packet is a little brochure about asset mapping. This is a new endeavor of ours. We were contracted by Troup County, by their chamber and their school system, to help them look at the assets they have in Troup County and see how they're deployed. What assets do they have that are strong? What assets may be missing totally or what might be weak that needs to be made stronger. You can flip through this and kind of see some of the components of that. It was fun. Merrill Wilcox in front, our strategic coordinator of partnerships, was our point person there and spent several months in Troup County. The fruition was great. We had a huge meeting with actually 2 big meetings with their community to roll this out. Interesting thing to find there was that Troup County has a lot of assets, but they have a lot of people living in poverty. The people who need the assets the most either don't know about them or can't get to them. So they're underway now with communication strategies and transportation strategies to get the people who are in need to get to the assets and the services they need. Troup County is concerned about better growing their own talent pipeline so that they can keep the people in the Troup County LaGrange area and help them with their talent pipeline. Okay. Next is a flyer for our Education Policy Fellows Program. The applications will be online soon. I suggest you start looking for these. It's a program that is, we're in our 11th class now. It's made up of business, government, foundation, education leaders. We meet several times a year, once a month for about 8 months. About 17 other states have education policy fellows programs. They come together usually around April, late March in D.C., so you can network on a national level, but you can find out better how to leverage policy here in Georgia. By the way, how many of our EPFP current class and alum are here? Raise your hands. Well, let's stand. Let's just see who they are. How about giving them a round of applause? It's good wherever we go to meetings, other organizations, wherever we might be that has something to do with education policy, typically we'll see several of our EPFP alum there, and it's great because they know about ed policy and they want to do something about it. They're looking for the so what, those action steps of ed policy. Next in the handouts, a blue page, a list of our media releases. As you glance down through those, you'll see that they're everything from magazines to newspapers to Electric Online. Robert Gaines, our communication director, does a great job of connecting with reporters, newsmakers across the state. Next is an article in the James Magazine by Dana Rickman. By the way, if you're wondering where Dana is today, Dana is at home. The good news is she survived back surgery on Monday, and after a few days in the hospital, she's back home. What concerns us is she's got twin 2-year-old daughters, and you know that's a challenge to have your back surgery and have those little girls wanting mom to play like she normally does. But she's doing well. Next is part of the blog that Maureen Downey of the AJC did. She posted the lead in there, then you can see it's an editorial that we offered, and Maureen used that to tee up the blog and have some conversation about the issue of elevating the profession of teaching, particularly the salary. Next is another article that Dana did about school safety, which is really a hot issue this year. The yellow page, if you want to be on our distribution list, to get our top 10, to get EdQuest, to get invitations for EPFP, just fill this out and drop it off as you leave. You can see down at the bottom there, if you like to tweet, there's the hashtag, and you can go to it right now if you'd like to. And lastly is an envelope. If you'd like to contribute to the partnership and help us do this important work that we're involved with, we would love to have your support. Okay. A few other loose end pieces here. Again, I remind you to drop by the desk on the way out if you want any of these resources, if you'd like to read those or have those for your classes or your schools. Out there also is our Economics of Education. We do those presentations based on that publication all over the state. The Georgia Municipal Association, the Georgia Academy of Economic Developers will be down in Valdosta next Tuesday and Wednesday. Their chamber and Valdosta State have asked us to come down and help with a regional summit on the economics of education. You're welcome to pick that up. And again, it's also on our website. There's information there from SREB, some of their pieces. And then there's some literature from the Georgia Leadership Institute, the work that they're doing. This postcard summarizes the work they're doing with social-emotional learning. Okay, let's go back now to the agenda for today. Richard Ingersoll was with us this morning at a breakfast meeting with some of our key stakeholders and funders. We had a great time listening to him talk about the research that he's doing. You've got his bio, again, on these beige sheets. I could say that he is a prolific writer, speaker, and researcher. But let me just put some numbers behind that, just looking down here quickly. Over 100 articles, reports, chapters, and essays he's written. Over 250 keynote addresses. He's been interviewed several hundred times with media and news outlets. What's impressive also are the number of publications, research that he's done that have been used by presidential researchers and House and Senate members. And I'm impressed that it's on both sides of the aisle. They both see the importance of his research and what that can contribute to their work in the teacher pipeline. And he's also received a number of awards across the country. And I thought one thing that's particularly interesting is he's not just living in Pennsylvania, but he lived in Georgia, and he was at the University of Georgia for 5 years. So he knows a little bit about what's going on with us. So with that, please welcome Dr. Richard Ingersoll.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I was a professor at University of Georgia 5 years, and I have to say I think it was the best job I ever had. And sometimes I regret having ever left. A terrific place. But in any event, as was mentioned, I do research. I've been doing research for the last couple decades on teacher supply, demand, and shortages, and teacher turnover. And I guess I should, let's see here. I'm going to speak today about what the research, what the data tell us about this key question. Why do we seem to have so much difficulty getting qualified teachers in our elementary, secondary classrooms? And of course, as you've heard many times, the conventional wisdom, or a conventional wisdom, a standard answer to this question is teacher shortages, which seem to be a perennial issue and have been a perennial issue at least over that last half century. And the story, as we've heard, goes like this, that we have this two big demographic trends, increase in student enrollments, increase in teacher retirements. These trends are colliding. We simply do not produce enough teachers. Our teacher ed and teacher preparation programs there's insufficient supply out there. And so the response is straightforward. Let's have all kinds of initiatives to recruit more people into this line of work. And we've had and have dozens and dozens of these types of initiatives. Signing bonuses and overseas recruitment and bringing people from the military, former military people, troops to teachers, and student loan forgiveness and housing assistance. And I'm sure Georgia has done and does a number of these things, all designed to bring more people into teaching, all based on the assumption that we have a supply-side problem. We're simply not producing enough people to fill all these classrooms, particularly in some fields like math and science and special education. Now, the data suggests that while all these things are perfectly worthwhile, I mean, who could be against trying to lure college seniors who are majoring in mathematics and science into teaching? That's all well and fine. But the data indicate that none of these initiatives have, nor will they solve the problem alone. They're simply not enough. And the data suggests that really these solutions are one-sided. And if we look closely, we find out that the source of the problems, this problem of staffing classrooms or qualified teachers, isn't simply due to these external demographic trends. It also has to do with schools, in here in a sense, the way schools operate and function. So what do the data tell us? They tell us that in some ways that conventional wisdom is something of a wrong diagnosis and a wrong set of prescriptions, or a partial set of prescriptions. Let me talk about the data a little bit. National data, big picture data. It is certainly true, this part of the conventional wisdom is true, student enrollments have gone up, teacher retirements have gone up. And most importantly, yes, there's significant numbers of schools out there that have trouble filling their positions. But it's not all subjects, and it's not all schools by any means. Here's the national picture. Let me explain this. So the red bars refer to the numbers, the percentage of secondary schools in the country that had an opening at the beginning of the year in these different subjects. And the yellow bar is those that said they had serious problems filling those positions. So again, this is national picture. So in mathematics, just under half of the secondary schools in this given year had openings for mathematics teachers. Less than half of them, less than a fifth of the secondary schools in the country did the principals tell us they had serious problems. So yes, there's problems out there, but it's not all schools. It's not everybody by any means. What the data tell us is we need to focus down on where these problems are. If we go to the bottom, so 40% of schools in this year had openings for social studies teachers, but hardly any of them had any difficulty filling them. Same thing for English. Almost half the schools had openings for English teachers. 6% of the secondary schools had any difficulties filling them. So we find that these shortages, these hiring difficulties, they're not all schools and it's not all subjects. And the tough ones, and this is perennial, are math, science, and special education. Those are the ones that primarily have these hiring difficulties. So I'm trying to sort of focus on what the problem is. It's not everybody and it's not all fields. But the other thing that data tell us is that it's not really true that the source of the problem is an underproduction of new teachers, that it's supply side. That's what the conventional wisdom tells us, and that's not really true. The fact is that we don't really have an underproduction. And one of the reasons we make this mistake is that we rarely look at all the sources of where teachers come from. Again, national picture. So that red slice of the pie, that's what we call the pipeline. Those are recent graduates of schools and colleges of education that went through teacher preparation, teacher education programs. And that's usually what we focus on. Notice that's only a quarter of those newly hired across the country in any given year. So, I constantly have people say, well, Richard, there's been this decline in the graduates in teacher education and teacher preparation programs in this country. And that is true. There has been a decline. And, they'll throw up their hands and say, geez, we have a shortage. But note, they're not taking account of the different sources of supply. So the blue slice of the pie and the yellow one, those are people from arts and sciences majors, biology and history and English, etc., that come into teaching, often through alternative programs. But the big slice, the green one, is what we call the reserve pool. That's the bulk of hires. Those are former teachers that come back in. If you don't take account of those, you certainly could come to the conclusion that we have a supply-side problem. In other words, if you look at all the sources of supply, what we find is we actually produce enough qualified teachers in this country. I realize this is heresy, even in math and science. We've quantified the number of math science teachers. It's enough to cover student enrollment increases. It's enough to cover teacher retirement increases. But what it's not enough to cover is pre-retirement turnover, quitting, attrition. That's the source of the problem here. That the problem isn't so much that we produce too few teachers, it's that we lose too many. The solution simply can't be recruiting more teachers. That's fine. We also have to include retention. The data tell us that most of those openings at the beginning of any given school year were simply opened up because someone quit 3-4 months before at the end of the prior school year. And most of that quitting is not retirement. Retirement's a piece. No, most of it is pre-retirement voluntary quitting. That's the issue, turnover here. And that's a huge source of this problem of getting every classroom to have a qualified teacher. It turns out that elementary secondary teaching is a rather high quit line of work. Again, national data, and this is where we followed people from college seniors into a whole series of different lines of work 10 years out. And these are their quit rates. How many people are still in that line of work 10 years later? And these are college graduates. So the highest quit rates are secretaries, child care workers, paralegals, correctional officers. And they all quit at higher rates than teachers. But what's interesting here is teachers are even higher quit rates than police. That surprised me. I kind of assumed that police work is probably high-stress work, has a lot of turnover. I've never been a police person. I don't know, but that's my assumption. But the quit rates in teaching, this is people coming in and how many are still there in 10 years, are slightly higher. They're also higher than nurses. They're higher than architects and lawyers and engineers. I don't have it on here, but the quit rate amongst teachers is about double that of college professors. Pharmacists, I know nothing about this, but for some reason, no one quits pharmacy. This is it's an extremely high retention line of work. I won't hazard any guesses as to why this is. I don't really know, but no one quits. So compared to other lines of work, there's some that have higher quit rates than teaching, but teaching's pretty high. But the other thing we often don't recognize is that teaching is not a normal occupation and line of work. Teaching is gigantic. Elementary, secondary teaching is gigantic. I talked about this morning. According to census, it's really one of the largest, if not the largest occupations in the country. There's over 4 million teachers. It's huge. It's so interesting. You know, you read these statistics that a farmer now produces through technology 100 times what a farmer produced in 1910. And so fewer farmers, more production. But somehow with education, we've never done that. We still need that teacher in front of students. We have all kinds of experience with technology, but it's what's called a labor-intensive line of work. And it's huge. There's a lot of them. Maybe someday we could replace teachers with technology in some form, but we actually haven't figured that out. It's a gigantic line of work that's often forgotten. And so if you combine that huge size with the relatively high quit rates, you get a scenario that those in this business describe as the revolving door. And let me explain this slide a little bit. So this is national picture and public schools, not private here, and 3.3 million teachers in this 11-12 school year. So it's slightly dated, but the more recent data, it's the same picture. Now, the yellow arrow is those that came into schools at the beginning of that school year. And that's something over 1/3 1,000,000, 340,000. 10, 12 months later, that orange arrow is those that left buildings, left schools, over 500,000. Notice that the orange bar is larger than the yellow bar. So picture this. I'm trying to capture this revolving door concept here, that in this 10, 12-month period, almost 1 million teachers, that's over a quarter of one of the nation's largest occupations, are in job transition, moving into, between, and out of schools. That's a lot. And I'm not just including here those quitting teaching altogether. I'm also including those that migrate between schools. That's a big flow too. This is a high turnover, high job, it's a very large occupation that has a great deal of job transition each and every year. Now, I'm not making the assumption that all this turnover, all this job transition is bad by any means. No. We all switch jobs some, and sometimes it's for the better. We're maybe not a very good teacher and we move to something else. There's all kinds of reasons why people move between different jobs, between different careers. It's not bad whatsoever. In fact, those often in business schools and universities who study employee turnover, the general consensus is that the good firm, the good company, the good operation both promotes and benefits from some degree of employee turnover. You know, you want your weaker members moving on, hopefully. You want to have fresh blood coming in. You know, you don't want 100% retention, and of course you'd never get 100% retention. It's not all bad. But there's also a general recognition that high levels of employee turnover, high levels of employee quitting are not cost-free. I have colleagues that get these fancy, in the business school, that get these fancy consulting contracts with, say, the insurance industry, quantifying what's the cost to insurance companies of X employee turnover rate. You know, because management wants to know. They know it's not cost-free. Up until recently, however, there was one industry where we never seemed to pay any attention to the costs and consequences of the high levels of employee turnover, and that was education in schools. Interestingly, we finally have a little more research. So it's not all bad, but it's not cost-free. And there's different sorts of costs and consequences. So one of the points I'm making today is that one of the consequences of the high levels of turnover in teaching are the teacher shortages. There's nothing wrong with producing more, but the data actually show we produce enough, we just lose too many. But we also have research now showing that schools with a chronic revolving door, this hurts student achievement. And by chronic revolving door, I mean schools, we have these in the Philadelphia School District, where they lose over 25% of their teachers each and every year. That is not cost-free. It's very disruptive to the environment. I mean, you might have more than one math teacher in the same year. You know, all the social studies teachers get together and make a whole new program, and then a couple of them leave, and it sort of falls apart. I mean, just think of the disruption to the whole process of having a revolving door. Undermining school cohesion. And we have some recent studies showing that also, just in terms of human resource department dollars, it's very expensive for a school or district every year to do massive hiring to fill all those spots that just freed up. So again, not all turnover of teachers or employees in general is bad, but high levels are not cost-free. And it's important to recognize this because, as you might imagine, the rate at which the revolving door revolves varies. It varies across types of teachers. It varies across types of schools. And it's particularly high in those first few years. These are some data we generated a while back and have gotten a lot of attention that, you know, everyone coming in the nation into teaching in a given year, after 1 year, about 12% are gone. This isn't moving to other schools. This is gone from teaching. And after a couple years, it's just under a quarter. And after 5 years, it's between 40 and 50% of those who came into teaching are gone. And then after that, it slows down. People that have been in teaching for 5 or 6 years, at that point, they've decided they're going to stick it out. So very high rates in the first few years. By the way, I should mention, I've been looking at some Georgia data, and Georgia looks pretty good. Georgia's rates are lower than these in the nation. The measures weren't exactly the same, but it was more like 32% had gone after 5 years. So Georgia, whatever you're doing, it's pretty good. Your beginning teacher attrition rates aren't as bad. And I'll get later to what some of the things that could be done to try to fix this. But the other thing that needs to be recognized here is that these overall figures mask very large school-to-school differences. And I'm willing to bet that this is true for Georgia just like it is the nation. And you can imagine. So this is just to give some illustrations. So in this given year, 16% of all the teachers in the country moved out of their schools. In low-poverty suburban schools, on average, that's about 1/10, which isn't very high. On the other hand, high-poverty urban schools are not quite double that. High-poverty rural schools are more than double that. In other words, the rate at which that revolving door revolves really varies dramatically. And so we need to kind of break this apart to, again, find out where the problem is. We need to get the diagnosis right. And this brings us to the whole why question, which I think is the crucial question. Why is it that teaching has relatively high turnover, quitting, attrition, whatever we want to call it, and more specifically, Why is it that some schools have so much more than others? And I think the why question is important because if we don't get the diagnosis right, we'll never get the prescriptions right. You know, if we want to fix the shortages, I'm arguing the data suggests we need to address retention and turnover. And if we want to do that, we need to figure out, well, why? What's behind this? And so we've done a lot of research trying to figure out what are the factors and what price tags might go with them if we fix them. That's crucial. Because when I speak to legislators, the first question is, Richard, what's this going to cost? That's a very good question. So we've been doing a lot of work on this, and I'm going to present a little of what we call self-report data, which is just one way. And what you do is you have somebody leave a company, or in this case a school, and you ask them, well, where are you, and why'd you leave, and were there problems? Stuff like that. Now, there's always issues of validity with this self-report data in the sense that if someone is leaving a school district, they may not feel they can be frank, giving the reasons why because they're looking for a letter of recommendation or whatever. In this case, it's an anonymous, confidential national survey questionnaire. And what do they say? And it's quite interesting. All right, public school teachers who moved or left from their schools, and I clumped these into clumps, and here's the kinds of reasons they gave. So less than a fifth said retirement. Now that's a finding. That's an interesting finding. We've heard again and again and again for decades that we have this aging teaching force and retirements are going up and that this is a main factor behind teacher shortages and we have a crisis. Yes, there is retirement, and it has gone up, although it's actually peaked now. That story is ending. But it's actually only a small slice of all the flows of teachers out of buildings. School staffing actions, that's my term for I was laid off, I was terminated, I was transferred across schools involuntarily, there was a school closing, a school reorganization. I mean, some districts have closed schools, opened new schools. That kind of stuff goes on. And that's a fifth of all these flows. Family or personal, almost a half. This is, I left that school because my spouse moved to another state. I had health issues. I wanted to raise babies. I needed to care for elderly folks. This is sort of part of life. Any line of work is going to have employees leave for these reasons. It's neither good nor bad. And it's a big piece here. It's a big piece. The bottom two bars are the ones that really interest me as a researcher. I left that school, this is 36%, because I wanted to pursue another job, a better career, a better opportunity. And then the longest bar of all, the bottom one, over 55%, I left that building because I was dissatisfied. I sort of think of those bottom two bars as flip sides of one another. You know, and if you add them up, they both totally outweigh things like retirement. So what's behind that dissatisfaction? So of that 55% that said I left that building because of dissatisfaction, here are the reasons they gave, and it's interesting. Notice that poor salary and benefits is towards the bottom. That's important because there's a lot of teachers and raising salaries is expensive. I'm not making an argument against that. I'm a former high school teacher. I wasn't paid very well, but that's actually not the main reason. That's an interesting finding. Dissatisfied with accountability and testing. Dissatisfied with the administration. I'd like that to be a little more specific. The way that was worded is a little too vague for me. Lack of influence and autonomy. So that's a case where how much voice and input do teachers have into the key decisions in the building that affect their jobs, which is, of course, a mark of a professional. And teachers often don't have much say in those decisions, although they have to live with the consequences and they may be held accountable. It turns out this is a big driver because buildings vary dramatically from how much teacher voice and input there is. And where this is a major gripe. Classroom intrusion, student discipline problems, poor facilities and resources. Notice that some of these would cost more money to fix than others. which is interesting. Fixing salaries is expensive. Giving teachers more voice, that might be difficult to do, and it maybe takes some time and effort, but it's not necessarily a big-ticket item. So let me just back up a little bit from these. I mean, a lot of these are what we call policy amenable. I mean, sometimes people say, well, low-income schools, the students' achievement gap, what can you do? You can't fix poverty, etc. But, you know, these are very specific things. I mean, think of that conventional wisdom that we have these big demographic that I started with. We have these big demographic trends, increase in student enrollment, increase in teacher time. It's like the problem is out there, and what can I do? Well, no, the data suggests the problem is in here. It's how schools are operated and managed and run. It doesn't make it easy. But I don't know that we can fix demographics. I mean, students are born and people retire and die. It happens. But some of these things are maybe fixable. So let's go back to that conventional wisdom. That we have these shortages, it's driven by these demographic trends, and that the main fix is let's recruit more people in. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with all of that. That's fine. But it will not solve the problem. And I'll give you an example. All right, so President Obama enacted this, 100K in 2010. And the idea was, let's put in money and let's recruit 10,000 new STEM, math, science, computer science teachers each year for 10 years. That's 100,000. Who could be against this? A terrific thing to do. Let's get bright college math science majors into teaching. Various fellowships and various different types of things were used here to do this. And that's fine. But look at the data. The data tell us that between 2012 and 2013 alone, over 40,000 math science teachers left. They left teaching. Of them, under 10,000 was retirement. Over 15,000 was dissatisfaction. In other words, if we just recruit more people in, which this is a great initiative, it's only half the thing. We can't just recruit. We also have to have retention. And the image that often comes to mind to me is, excuse my artwork, the image that often comes to mind to me is just pouring water in a bucket with holes in the bottom. We just keep pouring teachers in, but if we don't get some mud or something to patch some of those leaks, then we won't solve the problem. Nothing wrong with recruitment, we also need retention. That's the lesson I take away. And so I just want to close here briefly talking about a couple things that have been, could be done to improve retention. And one of them is support for beginning teachers. Recall that slide that 40 to 50% of beginning teachers get out of teaching within the first 5 years. And this has been recognized, and across the country, there's been a dramatic big increase in the percentages and numbers of beginning teachers that get some kind of support. The term induction is often used. There's some kind of program. And having a veteran teacher work as a mentor is one of the key components. And so this is a growth thing, and I'm willing to bet that Georgia has some kind of induction mentoring support programs too. And there's a variety of components, so I'll just go through this quickly. There's a variety of things that these programs have. Regular contact with a principal or administrator, which might seem odd to you. But when I was a high school teacher, I never saw the principal. So the beginning teachers on their own, a little bit of contact can go a long ways. Having a mentor, having seminars for beginning teachers, often offered by the district. Common planning time with colleagues in your same grade level or your same department. A teacher aide, reduced teaching load. Those are quite rare, those supports. And what do the data tell us? We now have a solid body of studies showing that these things cost money, but they also work. And I did what's called a literature review. I was asked to do this by Education Commission of the States. Richard, a lot of states are spending money on induction support program beginners. What's the data tell us? Does it work? And we went through all these studies, and it turns out almost all of them show positive effects, including on student achievement. So these are not cost-free programs, but they're good things. And amongst other things is they improve teacher retention. So finally, the last one I want to talk about is the issue of teacher input into decision-making. Recall, this is one of the key sources of dissatisfaction. There's a growing movement in the country. This is not a new aspiration, but there's a growing movement to give teachers more voice into decision-making. A number of states now have enacted in the legislation that each school should have a school-wide team, council, or committee that has administrators, teachers, sometimes parents, and is not advisory, actually has decision-making authority. That's very interesting. That's teacher voice. And oops, I went backwards here. So, the data tell us that in general, teachers have less often, those are the yellow bars, less often had influence over key decisions. Principals often have more. So in each of these cases, the percentage of principals that had a lot of influence over these decision areas is greater than the percentage of teachers. But it varies across buildings. And the research shows that, amongst other things, schools in which teachers have more input in these things have significant lower turnover. So the horizontal axis is how much voice do teachers have in the building, and the vertical one is turnover. And in the on the left end, it's almost 20% of teachers per year, and on the right end, it's down to less than 5%. The point is where you give teachers voice, you improve the retention of teachers. So let me just close here, wrap this up, because I think I've run out of time. All right. So, if we want to improve student learning, which we all want to do, we want a qualified teacher in every classroom. If we want a qualified teacher in every classroom, we've got to cope with teacher shortages. They're a major reason. The data suggests that if we want to deal with teacher shortages, we've got to deal with high levels of teacher turnover. We're not going to fix it just by making more teachers. We also have to cut down those leaving. And if we want to do that, we need to improve some of this dissatisfaction in these working conditions, like providing induction support, like providing teacher voice, those kinds of things. If we fix those, we slow down turnover, we undermine shortages, we do a better job of teachers in every classroom, we improve student learning. That's kind of the logic here. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, now the panel members can please come up to the stage. This program will be on our website in just a couple of days, including all the slides. So you can go there and look at it again, download it, and you also could refer some of your colleagues to it if they were not able to be here today. So all this information will be there. Dr. Ingersoll, thank you for doing such a great job of casting the big picture for us and giving us that research base. Now I'm going to give you the panel members in order. You may want to number these on your agenda. Will this be from your left to your right? First is Penny McRoy from the Professional Standards Commission. Next is Susan Lynn from Thomas University, which is in Thomasville. Next is Ron Wade, who is our boots on the ground school system representative. He's the talent officer for Fulton County Schools. Next is Laura Smith, assistant dean at University of West Georgia. And then Cindy Saxon, associate superintendent, Department of Education. Dr. Ingersoll will come back up when we get to the Q&A section of our program, so you can ask him questions also when we get to that part of the program. Diane Hopkins and I will be circulating with microphones. We'll just ask you to keep your questions focused and brief so that we can get to as many people as possible in that Q&A time that's left. You'll notice that we have co-moderators. That's because they are partners in the program today. Penny?
Steve. And thank you all for being with us today. It's a pleasure to see you. We have assembled a panel of educators today that have great information to share with you. And this information speaks to what Dr. Ingersoll shared about the importance of a strong teacher pipeline, recruiting teachers into the profession, supporting them, and making retention attractive to them. And an important part of the work that we do in schools. I want to call to your attention this infographic that Steve mentioned earlier, and this gives you a nice snapshot of the data in Georgia. Dr. Ingersoll mentioned that we do have pretty good retention in the state of Georgia, and that's on the side with the colored map at the bottom of the sheet. And as you will see there, we do a pretty good job of retaining teachers in the state of Georgia. Of course, we can do better, but that's pretty good compared to the national average. Also on that side, you will see that indeed enrollment in programs is down a bit. Enrollment and completions are down just a bit in Georgia. That's something that we're working on, and one of the things you'll hear about today is a strategy to help with enrollment as well as retention. And at the end of Dr. Ingersoll's presentation, he mentioned teacher leadership, and I do want to share that that is a movement in the state of Georgia. We the Department of Education, the Professional Standards Commission, the University System of Georgia, GLSSI, we are working together to focus on teacher leadership as a retention strategy. And so you see a map that shows where we have teacher leadership programs in the state of Georgia, and you'll hear from one of our panelists today a little bit about teacher leadership. And by the way, this is the kind of data that at PSC we are working to make available on our website. We've shared this with our program providers, and I know at the Department of Ed, they are also working to make these types of data available on our website. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindy, and then we'll jump in for a few questions.
Okay, great. I'm going to segue just a little bit on what Penny just said. Yes, the Department of Education we have a visualization called Georgia Insights that will help us with this data, and Penny and I are committed to working alongside GOSA because we think it is very important that the data that we share we give you the context, because sometimes it looks a little different from each of the agencies, and it's very important to all of our stakeholders that it looks consistent. So just know that we're working on that. That's one of our goals. Diane asked me to talk a little bit about how ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, has driven some of this work. And as you know, that was the reauthorization that was signed in 2015 by President Obama. And that was a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that was originally signed into law by President Johnson in 1965. The basis for that law is equitable access, which means that every student, no matter their race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or their zip code, have access to the very best teacher in every course and in a school that is led by the very best leader possible. So when we started on the journey of developing Georgia's plan for ESSA, Superintendent Woods was very clear. He wanted us to develop a plan for Georgia by Georgians. So with that charge, we set out on a trek across the state and went to a variety of locations, rural, suburban, urban, from north, south, east, and west, to talk with stakeholders. And we talked with around 2,000. And then we also had about 20,000 or 20,000 plus online survey responses that helped us know the direction that Georgia wanted us to go. We engaged working committees that consisted of about 20 educators, higher ed, RESA directors, RESA personnel, GOSA, you name it, and we included those on the working committees. And it became very, very apparent through the collection of all of that information that addressing the educator career continuum was of utmost importance. That begins with recruiting our best and brightest college students into our educator preparation programs, be that a traditional program or an alternative program. And then from there, we had to provide quality preparation, which is where the partnerships that we've developed through the P20 regional collaboratives that are held across the state, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to give you a little commercial about those later on. We've engaged in those partnerships to strengthen our preparation programs and to spread the word about induction programs. And as a result of that, we've birthed 5 induction collaboratives across the state in conjunction with the P20s. And that will serve to provide more effective induction for our beginning teachers. Then from induction, you have ongoing development, which is a part of the retention. And a piece of that is allowing for teacher advancement. And that's what Penny was talking about with teacher leadership. Sure, we have teachers who are born with a skill set and are destined to be principals or assistant principals or district leaders. But we also have teachers who want to impact the field of education from the inside. They want to stay inside classrooms. They want to bring about change for all the children in their schools and in their districts. So we need to honor that. And I do believe that that is one of our strongest, and so agree with Dr. Ingersoll about that teacher leadership is one of our strongest tools in retention right now, because the research will tell us that the more self-efficacy a teacher feels, the higher the impact on students, but also the higher the impact on their colleagues. So that's what has driven this work, and Penny and I have been so fortunate through the P20 collaboratives and through our work with the university system and our private colleges and universities that we get to see the work in action, and that's what we've seen with this group here, and are just so excited about what's going on in Georgia.
Thank you, Cindy. So we're going to start with a story about a recruitment initiative that is showing tremendous promise in terms of getting folks into the profession of education. And Laura Smith, we're going to start with you. Will you tell us about your recruitment initiative?
Early recruitment, yes, as we hear. First, let me provide just a bit of context. Teacher candidates are admitted into their teacher education program at universities typically around the end of their sophomore year, after they've completed most of their core and the requirements to be admitted to be issued their pre-service certificate, and that typically happens around their sophomore year. So our issue is recruiting into our universities, because we can't get them into teacher education unless we can get them into our colleges and universities. So early recruitment is very important. The University of West Georgia on the west side of the state and Augusta University on the east side of the state are both involved in two initiatives of recruiting at the high school level in the CTAE pathways, and that stands for Career Technical Agriculture Education Pathways. And you may be familiar that the goal is that every student in the state of Georgia completes a pathway, and there's pathways in many different fields. In the broader field of education, there are two pathways: the teacher as a profession pathway and the early childhood education pathway. Well, obviously, the teacher as a profession pathway is a clear recruiting tool. We have our academic advisors, and all of the institutions have their academic advisors talking with students in the teaching as a profession pathway, recruiting them into our colleges and universities straight into teacher education. But what we discovered was that the early childhood education pathways, or the early childhood pathways, are more enrolled. They have a much larger enrollment. And in a survey that University of West Georgia did with one of our local school districts, who has a very large early childhood pathway, out of about 200 students, about 70% of them wanted to go into teaching. But they were not in the teaching as a profession pathway. They were in the early childhood pathway because they really wanted to be elementary teachers. And maybe they didn't have the grades, and they wanted to probably pursue a 2-year degree and then move into a 4-year degree. So that became a pipeline, is to really investigate how could we really recruit in the early childhood pathway and the teaching as a profession pathway. Because many of our school districts did not offer the teaching as a pathway. It was a lower enrolled pathway, and they went with a higher enrolled. And there's also more funding available with that. So with the teaching as a profession pathway, there was already an articulation agreement that if the students complete that pathway and pass the end of pathway test, they earn 3 credit hours in our what we call an educational foundation class, or EDUC class. They earn the 3 credit hours of college credit during the high school years. We wanted to begin to look at the same thing for our early childhood pathway. So Augusta University, I found out, was starting this, and we began to look at this and look at the alignment of the curriculum between the early childhood and our EDUC courses. And there was a lot of alignment, especially in early childhood development, and especially for our elementary teachers. So we're working now with the school district to pilot modules in the early childhood pathway program that will then revise the curriculum and make it better aligned for support for elementary education teachers. And with this being a critical need area now, a shortage in elementary teachers, we feel like this is going to be a very effective recruitment tool. I'm not sure what my time is. I'm watching to see. So we are looking at articulation agreements now with elementary education. Augusta already has that in place, and they have currently this semester have 20 students in high school who are moving forward with their articulation and moving forward into Augusta University in elementary education. We are almost to the point of an articulation agreement at the University of West Georgia and hope to have that soon once we get the curriculum revised, and then this will go statewide with the CTAE program. Two other initiatives that many of us sponsor with Paige are the Future Georgia Educators Day, where we bring high school students in these pathways onto our campus. We work with them, really showcase what teacher education is. We only have them for a day, but we wow them with the field of education and recruit that way. And then we follow up with them and try to hold on to them. And then our dual enrollment, the increase in dual enrollment, getting high school students onto our campus into these education EDUC courses is really paying off benefits in supporting them all the way through that freshman year, retaining them into that sophomore year, and then into teacher education. So those are three early recruiting efforts that we are involved in.
Laura, I know that you have a couple of other things going on at the University of West Georgia that is meeting the needs of your districts and your schools. So talk to us a little bit about those.
Well, in special education, this is an area where we met with many of the special ed directors across the state and learned that adapted curriculum was an area that was in very critical need. So we have added that program as an MAT program to our curriculum at the University of West Georgia. And that currently right now we have over 200 students enrolled in the adapted curriculum special education MAT program. So that's one that is growing. That program allows someone to continue working. It is a hybrid program with online or evening courses so that someone can continue working in a career and become certified in special education. So that's one initiative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Now, Ron, we're going to turn to you. We know that you have a program that supports teachers who are in programs in spending more time in the schools as they're preparing to become a teacher residencies. The research tells us that that is a retention strategy. Can you share about your program, please?
Sure. In Fulton County, particularly in our talent division, we've really been trying to be deliberate and thoughtful about this proposition of how we acquire and retain teacher talent. And we've challenged a lot of the current norms and processes around how we do that business. As we began to look deeply at our engagement with our post-secondary partners, particularly in the student teaching realm, we saw that we spent a lot of time and energy on the practicums. We invested a lot of time and energy on the practicums, but we had very little conversion rates, meaning that we were converting fewer and fewer of our student teachers through the normal traditional practicum route to a contracted educator. And so we began having very deliberate conversations among ourselves and certainly with our post-secondary partners about how we could really move towards a more year-long proposition with some top-notch student teacher candidates. And we created what we call our First Step program. In our First Step program, first of all, we had to reduce the number of post-secondary partners and really try to partner with those universities that were really interested in this concept of year-long. And we reduced that from 13 to 5. But we also work with them in terms of how they would be able to identify their best and brightest candidates as potential interns for our program. And we identified roughly about 45 with our partners, and this has been our inaugural year. But the idea is that they stay with us for the full year. It's a unique year-long proposition where the interns stay with us for the full year. They're fully immersed in the classroom experience. They really get that in-depth clinical hands-on experience with a cooperating teacher. And the value that we really tried to express with our post-secondary is that we would do our due diligence to make sure that we found a equipped and capable cooperating teacher. Because as we talked to our partners, we discovered that that cooperating teacher, that mentor teacher could make all the difference in terms of that student teacher staying in or moving forward in the profession. And so they were heavy influencers. And so we talked to them about how could we make sure that that element of the program had someone who really understood how to be a mentor how to provide that critical feedback and support that intern through that particular process. And so we actually went through, develop a selection process for our cooperating teachers. Second, we decided, look, we're going to invest in these interns. We want them to feel a part of the Fulton County family, and we're going to ask a little bit more of them than they would normally experience through their regular program. We called it, we want to make sure that the post-secondaries were doing a great job in readying them for the classroom, but we also wanted to what we call Fultonize them. So how do you be an effective teacher in Fulton County? And so we knew that asking them to do more, we decided that we were also going to stipend them. And so we pay our interns a $3,000 stipend, paid at 2 points in the year. We also, in the midpoint, before they get that first payment, we have what we call the intern keys, where we do a performance review in terms of how well they're doing in their practicum, in their internship. And if they meet those requirements, they get the payment. And so, if they go through the process, at the end of this particular process, what we've told our interns is that we're going to guarantee you a job. And that's the main difference. That if you get through this process successfully, you will get your contract oftentimes before you get conferred for a degree. Because in Fulton County, with over 7,000 teachers and with just a 10% turnover rate, we weren't going to run the risk of overstaffing. And so we had enough room and space to guarantee these interns a job. And I'm proud to say that through our first year, our first cohort had about 45 interns. We started with about half of our capacity because we really wanted to make sure that, we learned what we didn't know. And we've learned a lot of things in this cohort year to make it better for the second year. But our capacity for this program is 100 interns. And this year we had 45, and we've actually contracted and hired 39 of those 45 that are staying with us. The way we see this as an acquisition process or pipelining process, with us hiring roughly 600 teachers, we figure that we can get 100 through this particular potential process, give them that early start of building that grit and resiliency that's needed when you're trying to teach other people's children, and supporting them through that second year. We figured that if we can retain just 80 of our 100, we figured that we could check off roughly 5% of our acquisition numbers. And that's really something that's positive for us. And it's a big difference from the amount of energy and influence that we're putting into the program through the normal practicums, not to take anything away from that. But through that process, we would touch in some way, through observation or practicum, roughly about 200 student teachers. And we were converting less than 20 of them. And so going through this particular route, we feel that we have a much more resilient new teacher who really has the potential to stay with us through the long haul.
Thanks, Penny. So what I would ask you is, what if I told you I knew a group of individuals who were not certified teachers, but who had a wealth of experience with teaching and learning because they spend 5 days a week in a K-12 classroom, and that they have a clear vision of what the roles and responsibilities are of a classroom teacher in today's schools? And what if I told you they lived in the community of the classroom in which they are serving, which perhaps might mean that they have a similar cultural experience to the students and families which they are serving? And what if I told you that that group, if they become certified teachers, stay? They are not like the data that we've heard about this morning. Their retention rates are 80% and higher. And what if I told you that we had 17,000 plus in the state of Georgia? You might think that we need to pay some attention to those. That group of individuals are paraprofessional educators. Paraprofessionals are school employees. They serve in a classroom under the supervision of a certified teacher. And they spend time with instruction and support of children and families. that's the group that my colleagues across South Georgia in the K-12 system, my partners, and I've been working on to grow our own in the South Georgia rural areas. It is not an easy task. It's not a panacea by any stretch. There are a lot of barriers for paraprofessionals returning to school. Not on our campus because we're a small liberal arts institution, but if you've ever managed to navigate finding a parking space on a large university campus, you know the first step of the difficulty, navigating admissions and financial aid, etc. When courses are offered, cost is a huge barrier for post-secondary education for these folks. Just the work-life balance. What we have done is attempt to address as many of those barriers as we can. I would be remiss if I didn't say that cost is a huge issue. The one I will speak to this morning is the one that I feel like of all of the issues, we have made a difference, and it has meant access to a degree program and certification. And that is that we moved our programs to a Saturday. We have a Saturday model program for all of our programs. So right now we're partnering with Berrien County School District, which is about an hour and 20 minutes to the east of us. And so we actually travel to Berrien County School District to offer our program on Saturday. It's a hybrid program every other Saturday face-to-face. So let me tell you just a little bit about our current data. So I see this is pilot work that we've been doing to see what we can do to find ways to work with these particular individuals. So our first two cohorts resulted in 15 paraprofessionals moving into becoming certified teachers. Those individuals were largely in early childhood and middle grades in secondary mathematics. They all took jobs in rural South Georgia, and they are currently in years 3 and 4, and 100% of them are still teaching. Most of them are teaching in the same school in which they began. They are individuals in comparison to our traditional population right now that are reflect a greater minority group. The current group that we're working with, a cohort, will be 10 more paraprofessionals out of the Berrien County cohort. Will finish with degree completion and certification in about 3 weeks. That group together has 57 years of experience in a classroom. The average age is 35. It ranges from 23 to 48. And almost all of them, with 3 weeks to go, have completed all testing and have accepted a job in a rural South Georgia school district. They will triple their salary in the fall. It transforms their lives, they tell me. And for the school district, they get an employee who is invested in that community and will not leave. So that's our effort right now, and we feel really excited to be a part of contributing to non-traditional folks who are degree completers in our Georgia goal to increase those by 2025.
That's amazing, Susan. Isn't that great work? Yeah, that's amazing. Susan, if you would, give us a little synopsis of the retention effort you have underway that you're working on down there that both Dr. Ingersoll and Penny and I have referred to with teacher leadership.
I sure will. So I would like to start it with a story. About 15 years ago, I was doing some longitudinal research following teachers' career paths. And my colleague and I went to interview a teacher who had just completed her 10th year, and she had left the profession. So we were interested in, very sadly, interested in knowing why she left. And here's what she told us. I love my students, I love being a teacher, but I had reached the point, and had for some time, that I needed to take on additional leadership roles. I wanted to help my colleagues who needed my help. I wanted to mentor new teachers, but I did not want to be a principal. Nobody could figure out how to make that happen for me. And so I had to leave. That teacher, Teresa, is the reason that I'm so passionate about teacher leadership in Georgia. By any metric you would use, she was your star teacher. She was the person that you would want your children being in her classroom. And so I think that the new tiered certification that's been put in place with lead teacher at the top, our new teacher leader certification, which has allowed some of us to offer programs in teacher leadership. We currently have a program. We graduated. We went after them. We went after. All of us have been in a classroom working with teachers. We went after those leaders, teacher leaders. And as a result, we graduated 80 last year. We have nearly 300 in the program right now. We will, about 100 will graduate in a few weeks. They are excited about the work they do. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, part of the reason they are is because our program has been co-developed and is co-delivered by some of the best and brightest teacher leader and ed leaders, school building leaders in the state of Georgia. And some of them I see in this room today, so I thank you. It is making a huge difference in the work that we do. Teachers are saying to me, and I will hear this a lot at graduation, how they are excited about the new knowledge that they have, that it truly impacts the work that they want to do each and every day as they stay in the classroom. They want to stay in the classroom, but to provide that same support and help that Teresa wanted. So it's exciting to me that they have those career paths. And we know from research that allowing teachers opportunities for leadership results in collaborative and shared responsibility for school improvement. And that is a really good thing for student learning as well as teacher retention.
I think you've heard promising stories. We've got great work going on in Georgia, and I realize it's time for us to transition to our Q&A. And so Dr. Ingersoll, if you will please join us. And I believe we have folks who will be ready to give you a microphone when you have a question. While we're getting set up, please join me in thanking these panelists for sharing their stories. We are ready for questions. If you will raise your hand, someone will bring you a microphone. I believe I see one here and two down here. Another one over here. Craig Harper, can we start with Craig?
Thank you, Dr. Ingersoll, for being here today and presenting this information. My name is Craig Harper. I'm with the Professional Association of Georgia Educators, and we're very involved with some of the work that the panel have talked about as well today. You mentioned that autonomy is one of the major factors in teachers deciding to leave the profession. There was a lot on that one slide you had. Could you unpack for us some other issues from your research that lead, the kinds of pressures that are on educators that cause them to leave, that leaders in schools or others can do to make it a more inviting profession to those that are considering it or those that are already in the profession?
So you're asking what might be the big factors behind the high levels of turnover. And I'd mentioned the issue of voice and classroom autonomy. Okay. Well, student discipline behavioral issues are big. And so teachers that leave their buildings or leave teaching often cite that as a big factor. And you might then say, well, that's a no-brainer. Okay, if there's a lot of misbehavior in the building, then people are going to want to get out. What can we really do? I remember speaking to a legislative group, and a senator said, but, you know, kids are just rougher than when we were better behaved when we were teenagers, and television is a bad influence, and there's just not the respect for authority like there used to be. And just, Dr. Ingersoll, isn't it just part of being a teacher that you got to put up with a lot of disrespect? It's a good question. I wasn't quite sure what to say. Maybe kids now are better behaved or worse behaved than when we were kids. I'm not sure about that. But there's an interesting thing in the data that schools vary dramatically in how well they cope with their student behavioral discipline issues. You know, when we get data from teachers and principals, you know, how big is it a problem in your building? There's huge differences among schools. Some do a much better job of dealing with it. And poverty is not the only factor here by any means. I mean, you can have inner city schools that are tough places, so to speak, where they really have a handle, they do well with student behavioral issues. And it turns out those buildings that do a better job have far better teacher retention. So it's not just that we need to throw up our hands and say, you know, teenagers are problems these days and it makes the teaching job tough. Let's look at those places that do a much better job coping with it. You know, some kind of restorative job, whatever. There's all kinds of programs out there, character education, to sort of try to work with, I'm thinking of teenagers here. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. That's a big issue, the kind of the culture and the climate. And, you know, another big one is how much support the teachers feel from the building's administration. That's huge. And it varies dramatically across schools from, you know, I'm on my own and whatever I do, I'm not going to get any thanks for. You know, I could be up till midnight preparing interesting stuff, or I could come into class unprepared and no one notices and no one cares. That all the way over to a lot of support and recognition for good teaching. So in a sense, this is, you know, these are, I don't want to say obvious, but the factors behind retention are not surprising. And salaries is important, but it's not the only one and it's not the main one. Some of these other things wouldn't cost so much money to fix.
Can I speak to the retention from a more district practical standpoint? He's right. You know, our theory of action in Fulton County was how do we build an infrastructure that really deals with this idea of acquisition all the way through retention, that they're not isolated, that they're basically scaffolded on each other. And so it starts with, you know, deliberate thoughtfulness in terms of who you let through the door first. So what are your criteria, your standards, your competencies that you're selecting against? And then how do you move, once you've gone through that selection, how do you move them into a rigorous induction protocol where you're not just basically bringing a bunch of teachers in an auditorium and basically just throwing teaching at them, but you really try to understand what that individual educator needs to grow. And so we take the data that we use for selecting, and we use that same data to determine how we can customize development for that individual teacher. And we take them through a year-long proposition for that. And then we move into other conversations about how we don't have career ladders, but how we can create opportunities for our educators to earn more by doing more. And also, how do we set up wellness protocols? Because we have to move into how do we start addressing the emotional and the well-being of our own employees, so establishing a wellness program. And so you can't look at it as isolated, siloed buckets, but how do you create a thoughtful, comprehensive protocol that starts with acquisition and selection, that moves all the way through and build upon each of those pieces to retention?
Thank you all for being here today. I've enjoyed this thoroughly. I'm Valerie Wilson, the Executive Director for the Georgia School Boards Association. And as a former school board member and now the executive director of the association, all 180 school boards in the state, I'd like to ask you a question about policy. What are some policy decisions, whether at the local level or the state level, that's necessary for effective teacher retention and recruitment?
All right. You want me to
Well,
start?
I believe it starts with preparation. We obviously have to have effective preparation. If teachers are prepared better, Ron mentioned the teacher residency. If they're spending a full year in the classroom for their student teaching as opposed to a semester, the research tells us that they are more resilient, and that is a more effective method for preparing educators. So I believe it starts with preparation, and then we have to have induction. Fulton County has an induction program. Ron described a very comprehensive induction program. Some of our school systems in Georgia do not have that, and that comprehensive model. So we've got to have more attention paid to induction. We are now training pre-service educators to use the data that are derived from the assessments that they take when they're in programs to inform what learning they need in those early years of the profession. And so we're equipping them to go into a situation where they can say, these are my areas where I need to really focus and improve. But we've got to have school systems in place prepared to provide them that support.
I think one of the policies that levers that recently has been the work with professional learning as far as recertification, Penny, that PSC has done. We've gone through a transformation. We no longer sit in seats and collect hours to be recertified. We are participants in professional learning communities. We set goals, and in the event that we need to, we develop a plan for professional learning. And all of that is to support, and it's self-empowering for a teacher or for a leader to build that plan themselves based on either their pre-service data or their most recent feedback from their administrators. We're at a time where those policies can truly drive the culture and the climate in the school, because when everyone is accountable to themselves for their growth and their progress, then that begins to take hold and it bleeds over onto students. And we see everybody becoming accountable for what they are learning and what they're doing with their learning. So I'm just most appreciative for that, Penny. I think the work that PSC has done has been transformative.
Thank you. And one other thing I'll mention is related to retirement, and I'm no expert on this, but in Georgia, I know educators who retire have the opportunity to go back and work 49% of the time. And so those educators provide a valuable resource in terms of being able to serve as coaches or mentors to early career teachers. And so we need to be sure that we keep that avenue open in the state of Georgia.
Not only teachers, but leaders as well, retired principals and APs.
I would just like to, I don't have this figured out at all. I have more questions than I have answers. But I would love to see policies that make possible more seamless work between K-12 and higher ed. So P20 work. I look at the faculty at Thomas University, and frequently I talk about us as P20 faculty. And I would love for there to be more thought around how to make that happen instead of being in two separate worlds.
And this is a big one, and I understand, but I think we have got to begin to get serious about this notion of performance. I hesitate to say the term evaluation because there's such a fear factor baked into how do we begin to have honest dialogue about how well your talent is doing in your buildings. And the teacher evaluation, because there's a credibility issue across the nation, and there's such a fear factor that people aren't getting the right data points to really honestly engage them in terms of where your improvement opportunities are. And so we got to get back to how do we begin to inform the people who are doing the work, those things that, you know, where along the line you're doing extraordinary work, and can we have an authentic and honest conversation about where your improvement opportunities are, and see that as a true data point versus a fear factor, versus a way that you're going to push me out of my classroom or my school or ding me. But it's a data point, and we're going to support you in improving that. So we got to figure this performance evaluation piece out in education. I think is really hindering us. And I don't think it's doing us well in terms of how we can best leverage the talent in our schools.
I think sometimes what we hear from my vantage point at the state as we're working with teacher and leader evaluation is a lack of really true, authentic feedback. I mean, it's got to be there. That's what can drive your professional learning, which in turn drives your school improvement. So we have to learn to be authentic, and that is on both sides, both the leader and the teacher. I think we are working toward that and trying to convince teachers that evaluation is not about gotcha, it's about improvement. And there's not a single person in a single classroom anywhere that doesn't have some area that they need to improve, nor in any school office or school building that doesn't need to improve. So we have to keep that message out in front and try to diminish the idea of punishment or gotcha from that conversation. And I'm very appreciative of the PSC. They are not using the teacher effectiveness measure nor the leader effectiveness measures because those include growth that is very variable across our state. And so there's no way that we can have consequences in place for data that's so variable. So what does that mean? That means that we have to make the teacher assessment of performance standards, which is the observation piece, and the leader assessment on performance standards, which is the equivalent of the observation piece for leaders. We have to strengthen the feedback and the use of that. We have to make it very targeted, and we have to include the teachers and leaders in that conversation. It's not a do it to you, it's a let's figure it out together. And use the talent in our buildings and in our districts, just as Ron said, because the ultimate goal is to improve our student performance. And we have to remove the personal part of it and be willing to have those critical conversations.
And I'll just say that we're starting those critical conversations early. In the pre-service education, we use the same instruments as the in-service teachers. So we have what we call the CAPS, the Candidate Assessment of Performance, which is the same as the teacher assessment of performance. And we start this in terms of coaching our students on areas of improvement using their own data, their results from the CAPS, their results from their EdTPA, and identifying the different scoring rubrics and looking at where are the areas of improvement in developing that individualized professional learning plan that Ron was mentioning. So we're starting the conversations very early. We're starting that protocol very early of improving your practice at the pre-service level.
I have a question for Ron. My name is Danielle Gray. I was hoping that you could share a little more detail about the residency program that Fulton County is piloting, I guess, this past year. Which universities are y'all working with, and are your mentors and your student teachers dispersed throughout the district so that there's equal access based on the type of school that they might be placed within?
Yes. So right now we have 5 partners, and Marcia's here, so forgive me if I miss anyone. It's the Kennesaw State, Georgia State, the University of West Georgia, Clark Atlanta, and Spelman. And yes, there's a distribution throughout the state. I'll be honest with you, it wasn't something that was deliberate, it's just the way things fell out. But we felt that we're in the placement phase of this process now, and we thought the ideal situation is that our interns would stay put. Because for the past year, they developed relationships not only with their students in that building, but with school administration and colleagues. And so the ideal placement is for them to stay put in that school. And so that's, the distribution is across the district. The feedback that we're getting from interns is just excitement. And I'll have to admit, and sometimes we overlook the very basic things. During our orientation of these interns, an intern came up to me and said, this is pretty simple. Why is it so hard to do? and it was profound. Whether it shouldn't be, I don't know. But we also, what we've learned is that the $3,000 really wasn't the sort of the secret sauce in this equation. Is that we brought these interns in and immediately made them a part of Fulton County, part of a culture. And the thing that they got most excited about was a shirt that made them a cohort. And we actually gave them a laptop and an email address. They went berserk over that. And so that sense of belonging and culture, I think, Dr. Ingersoll, is one element that we could really explore. Start building cohorts and teams of new hires. We're looking at a process that we're calling Get to 5, where we think about bringing in this cohort of 600 new teachers and making them a real-life cohort who support each other. Even thought about giving them some type of crest or something to identify them. But I think there's real opportunity in this idea of creating this community among your new hire teachers.
Good morning, Tim Carroll from the Metro Chamber. I'm curious what advice you would have for businesses and other community organizations like chambers who want to support teacher recruitment and retention.
I talk a lot, so
Yeah,
you give me a mic and I'll go on all day.
So I'm butting
So
in,
I'm going to
Ron.
apologize.
Yes, as I said, cost is a huge factor for paraprofessionals like I'm working with. Well, for all folks moving into teaching, but certainly for paraprofessionals, it's a huge. So at the state level, as well as any of businesses, other ways in which folks can financially support public service scholarships, loan forgiveness programs for those students would be very helpful in the long run.
I've asked them to please help me find a window to talk about my idea of a teacher villages. And so I'm going to take my opportunity right now. I have this idea about places in the state, and we have geographic locations that it's just more difficult to staff because it's far, far away from cultural kind of events that would be found in Atlanta. It's far away from a Target sometimes. It's far away from a Starbucks sometimes. So my idea, and this would be great for chambers of commerce if they could get behind this, and maybe the construction organizations in the state, but I would love to see us in some places where we're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions in some places, in grants and things that we are seeing not really come to fruition. So my idea is that we create a village of about 5 to 10 homes that are 3-bedroom, 2-bath, nothing fancy, but a nice home that a teacher that's recruited into one of these areas could live in for free for 5 years. Once they live there free for 5 years, number one, they're saving money, right? And then I laugh because we heard about somebody from Michigan who told us at a convening that we were at not long ago that they had socials with fire departments and police departments. In other words, get them married. Get them married and they'll stay too. So once you've spent 5 years in a community, you're a part of that community. You've possibly seen siblings come through your classroom, so you have a tie there, your heart is there. So if I could find major dollars out there somewhere to help us pinpoint the locations where they would be most beneficial, there's a swath through our state that starts in southwest Georgia and goes up through the middle into the coast. I so want to see us do something that attracts some of our best and brightest out of other places. Plus, our grow your own folks. Why couldn't they occupy those homes? Whatever it takes to get somebody invested in that community. And then Ron's offshoot of that is let's do it with loft apartments in downtown Atlanta. But it gives those teachers a sense of community and it gets them involved and engaged. So talk to me if you got money.
I'll say this quickly, really helping districts develop solid wellness programs for their staff. I mean, we're seeing emotional stressors even. I know we've put a lot of attention on students, but we're seeing it among our teachers. and really starting to really develop and invest in wellness opportunities for our educators.
And I'd like just to mention the Carrollton County Education Collaborative. And this is an initiative that began in 2014 where we had business leaders, Chamber of Commerce, the president of our West Georgia Technical College, the president of the University of West Georgia, the superintendents of the school systems, and other faith-based community members, decision makers in the community, who came together in 2014 for the first meeting to really set a goal, to honestly set a goal that every student in this area, in the West Georgia area, would graduate from high school prepared to move on to secondary education, to enroll in secondary education, to be employed, successfully employed, or to enlist in the military. And we've divided up into different teams. We were a P20 focus. We are now a birth prenatal focus, because as we began to really examine our community and the needs of our community, the urgent need for us was in prenatal care and that early critical development of birth through 5 years old. So we have programs now, summer learning programs, that businesses are sponsoring, because oftentimes the school systems can do that, but businesses can help and sponsor space. So we have summer learning programs, GAP programs, tutoring programs, all going on through our community. So I invite you to look at the CCEC, and I believe this organization has endorsed that as well.
Good morning, or afternoon. My name is Nathan Alexander. I'm the state director for the Georgia STEM Teaching Fellowship, and I'm a professor of mathematics at Morehouse College. And I'm thinking about Richard's sort of imperative to think about the leaky bucket. And so as we sort of talk about, teacher retention, at the national level, we have the data that you showed us earlier, but I'm interested in sort of locally, what are you finding about teacher education and preparation and how it informs why people leave? So locally here in Georgia, what are you noticing in your programs as to those teachers that are leaving and what's happening there?
Well, we have rigorous preparation programs that we feel are designed to prepare educators who have that extra factor that some researchers call it grit, but resilience, to prepare them to stay. We've mentioned some things already about the importance of induction, the importance of that year-long teacher residency at the end of the preparation program, moving in then to a supportive environment where they do have induction. We do, as you've seen on our infographic, we do have better retention numbers in Georgia, and we see that across all of our preparation routes, our non-traditional route, our public institutions, our private institutions. So again, the effective preparation and then the induction are critical. And then those opportunities, as we've heard, to lead while remaining in the classroom, if that is their desire. Susan's program for teacher leadership is one of several in the state, and we are embarking on some work now to have a statewide teacher leadership advisory council, a group of individuals who will serve as advocates and help folks at their local levels, their peers and their supervisors in their local level, I should say, learn about teacher leadership, what it is, how it helps not only retain teachers, but improve instructional capacity and improve student growth and learning. So you have to really take a comprehensive approach. I'm going to hand the microphone off to Susan, and others may have some suggestions.
I work with folks who are from the communities. So, I won't say that in my other life where I was somewhere else that it wasn't important, but there is a little extra added importance knowing that I'm helping prepare folks that are going right into schools right down the street. And so for us, we're a regional institution. Those folks come to us, they go right back into the pipeline, right back into those schools. So really they stay. What I want to say that I think makes the difference is there's specific things about what we do in teacher preparation programs that make a difference. And I think there's probably national data to support that. So it is early and often immersion in a K-12 classroom that is structured, that there's ongoing feedback, not feedback to that particular candidate every 5 weeks, but every week. So that I'm constantly helping he or she look at their practices and begin. Having them get to the end of a preparation program feeling like they hit the classroom ready in the areas that we service, and it's not a sink or swim, that it is not a baptism of fire. Yes, they have plenty still left to learn, but I'm not freaking out thinking, oh my gosh, I had no idea it was like this. That they know what it's like, and they're ready.
Nathan, I think what you were asking about too is are you also asking about what our numbers look like? Okay, you want to talk about that? Okay, go Ron.
So locally, it really looks just as Dr. Ingersoll has indicated. I mean, it's our more hard to staff schools have the highest turnover. Our content areas that tend to turn over tend to be special ed, where the work is probably more complex. We do see loss in STEM because we see ourselves competing with private sector for those skill sets. And so it reflects in terms of when people, that revolving door that exists at the 0 to 5 years is reflective in our districts. And so I think his data is on point in terms of where the turnover and the exodus is occurring at the local school district.
One thing I will mention very quickly is that there was a study done several years ago by a couple of our colleagues at the PSC, and one thing that they saw, the 5-year place where we're appear to lose so many around that 5-year mark. When you think about how old those teachers are, they are 26, 27, 28 years old. What are they doing? They're getting married and they're having babies. Those two things, which you saw in Dr. Ingersoll's data, that surfaces as one of those reasons. Well, in this report that the PSC published, each year when we hire back across the state, we are rehiring, 30% of what we're hiring are rehires that are coming back to the profession. And we are working diligently to increase our data collection processes so that we can better track that in and out. We're not there yet, but we want to be able to track that because we need to know how many of those truly are coming back. Are they coming back to the same school they were in? Are they coming back to the same district? Exactly what's happening, but just if you look at it in a logical fashion and based on this report from a few years ago, that's what it looks like. It's those family things. It's a natural place in their growth as a human being. So, Penny, I think we're nearing our end time. I don't know about all of you, but I've thoroughly enjoyed being here. It's been great. Oh, one more question? Okay.
I just
Do we
have.
Okay, great.
All right, I have just one question, and as to teacher retention for those teachers that have been in the field for a length of time. I know there's research out there in organizational workplace that's not necessarily in the education literature about spirituality in the workforce. That necessarily it's not finances or money or how much are being paid, but those things of connectedness, family, and community, and how that relates to retention in the workplace. And I was wondering if the professional organizations in Georgia was doing any research and interviewing or looking at themes and patterns in those teachers that have remained in the profession the longest to see what you can glean for that to be able to put in place to help retain teachers.
We look at we move into our retention space. One of the things we're really trying to learn is why people stay. And so we're really trying to really delve into this notion of stay interviews. Instead of trying to catch people while they're leaving, really asking those teachers who find themselves in hard-to-staff schools, why are you still here? And what's motivating you to stay here? And how do we take that data, that information, begin to scale it up? And we're learning that this sense of value and worth is important. So really taking some time to understand how do we reward and recognize is important for people who are at the senior part where the pay is not so much a variable. That sense of voice that Dr. Ingersoll made reference to is also important. And so we're beginning to really understand this idea of going back to the people who are closest to us and sort of asking them some critical questions about what do you need, why are you still here, what do we do, what we can do to support you.
Well, thank you. I know that we are out of time. I want to thank our host and Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. And please join me again in thanking Dr. Ingersoll and our panelists.
Well, thank you. I'll make 1 minute's worth of comments. So first of all, I want to thank our presenters and the audience for great questions, great involvement, and lots of learning. So thank you. Dr. Ingersoll, welcome back to Georgia, and maybe we can work out a way to keep you around for a little bit longer. But I had a great view today of the kids walking back and forth. I don't know if you, on this side of the room, you may have missed out, but hopefully you didn't. And it's just a good reminder to me of how worthwhile this work is. And in fact, I really can't think of any work that is more worthwhile. So I want to thank everybody for your commitment and your passion and what you're working for the future. Because I truly believe that there's no problems that if we work together and we work smart that we can't solve. Just a reminder, in your packet there is an envelope, and in that envelope you can help maybe write a check or drop some cash to help support some of the work that the partnership does, because I do believe it's worthwhile work and meaningful. And the last thing is this URL. This is for feedback. We want to continue to constantly improve. We thrive to make these better and more meaningful for you. So if you would, please use that URL. It's a brief survey that hopefully as we do these in the future, we can just continue to make them better and more meaningful for you. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for your commitment. Have a great afternoon.